Big Ben played through speakers to cheering crowds in London, marking the historic moment for both Great Britain and the European Union when the UK breaks away from the bloc after nearly half a century, charting a new course into untested waters. The US Senate votes against calling witnesses to Donald Trump's impeachment trial in a decisive victory for Republicans, this paving the way for a quick acquittal. And the death toll from coronavirus in China rises to 259, with close to 12,000 cases confirmed. One French person among 180 recently evacuated from Wuhan also showing symptoms of the virus. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Orcott. Now, as of midnight Brussels time, the UK is now out of the European Union, quitting the club it joined 47 years ago. For most people, there will be very few noticeable differences until the end of this year, by which time Boris Johnson's government aims to negotiate a Canada-style trade deal with the bloc, though it represents the country's biggest geopolitical gamble in decades. An hour before the Brexit deadline, the Prime Minister said whatever bumps lie in the road ahead, the country will succeed.
It is potentially a moment of real national renewal and change. This is the dawn of a new era in which we no longer accept that your life chances, your family's life chances, should depend on which part of the country you grow up in. This is the moment when we really begin to unite and level up.
As we saw earlier, there were jubilant scenes during the official Brexit celebrations in London's Parliament Square. Thousands of people packed in to wave flags and sing the national anthem at the stroke of 11 o'clock local time. Few of the divisions in other parts of the country were on display. Naomi Lloyd tells us more.
3, 2, 1.
This was the moment Britain left the European Union after almost half a century of membership. Jubilant crowds waved in the new era at London's Parliament Square. And on stage, Nigel Farage, the man who spearheaded the Brexit campaign, seeing his dream become reality.
We did it! We've transformed the landscape of our country, and there are some that say we shouldn't celebrate tonight. Well, we are going to celebrate tonight, and we are celebrating tonight because we know that this is the single most important moment in the modern history of our great nation.
Earlier, Brexit supporters began gathering outside the British Parliament, eager to claim their place on this historic night.
This is our day to shine. This is when we become our own sovereignty again, and we rule. So at the end of the day, we have to answer to nobody. Simple as this. It's a proud day for us.
Some comparing it to the Second World War and liberating Europe from the Nazis.
It's Battle of Britain again, all over again, as far as I'm concerned. This is the beginning of the end of the tyranny that was forced upon his country.
Whilst almost half the UK may not share these sentiments, the 2016 referendum vote saw 52% vote in favour of leaving and 48% vote to stay in the EU. For Brexiteers, this Independence Day, as many are calling it, is when they finally got to wipe their feet of the European Union.
Well, for more Brexit analysis, I'm now joined on set by France 24's Foreign Affairs editor, Philip Turle. Philip, we saw people there wiping their feet on the EU flag, celebrating breaking away from the shackles, but it now falls on Boris Johnson to deliver. He's somehow got to keep the country united and work out these trade deals that he's promising. He might lose quite a lot of support if they don't come fast.
Well, there's something else that I think he's got his eye on the rear-view mirror, and that is on Nigel Farage, because a lot of people have been saying, OK, Nigel Farage is the head of the Brexit Party. He was formerly the leader of UKIP, the UK Independence Party, and the sort of catalyst that caused all this Brexit business in the first place, or one of the catalysts that caused it. Many people are saying, well, no, now that Britain has left the EU, Nigel Farage might just disappear into the woodwork. We're not going to see him again. He's never managed to get really any of his supporters elected into the House of Commons. But Boris Johnson knows that if things don't go as he would like them to, then there's a big chance that Nigel Farage will spring out of the woodwork at some point and become a major critic and foe of Boris Johnson. So he's under pressure there as well from the Brexit Party to carry on working on Brexit and to do things that they want to do to make this a big clean break with the European Union. OK, that's the first point. Second point is that, yes, it's going to be an uphill struggle backwards for Boris Johnson because he's got several things on his back burner. The first one is he has to reunite the country. The divisions that have been caused by Brexit since 2016 are extremely profound, and people have got to a point where they don't even talk to each other anymore because they don't want to have an argument over Brexit, or they avoid the Brexit subject completely. And if that isn't enough, that's in large parts of the United Kingdom. Then you have Scotland, which is saying, well, we want to stay in the European Union. We didn't want Brexit in the first place. We voted by 62% in the referendum in 2016 to stay in the EU. So now that we're being forced out because London wants us out, we're going to bring in, we want to fight for a new referendum. That is what Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, was saying yesterday. So Boris Johnson has also got that spectre hanging around for him to suddenly have to deal with maybe later if support goes up in Scotland for a referendum. At the moment, it's about 50-50 for and against, and as far as London is concerned, they're not going to allow for a second referendum. But if that swings in favour of more people wanting a referendum, he might have to give in Boris Johnson to allow the Scots to do that and have a second referendum. So that is also difficult. And the third thing that Boris Johnson has got to deal with is the European Union. Undo 47 years and 31 days of treaties and agreements to work out some kind of new trade agreement over the next 11 months. It is a Herculean task, Alexander, and many people are saying, well, Boris Johnson just won't be able to do it.
It's not even in the EU's interest for it to go particularly well, because if all is rosy, one of the other 27 might get ideas of their own. You know, we can have a taster of this.
That is also a threat, and a lot of European leaders, I think even Emmanuel Macron, the French president, are worried that this could happen now. But if you look at what's happened since the referendum, Theresa May went around Europe trying to galvanise support from European leaders in a bid to split the European Union to make it easier for her to get the Brexit she wanted. She didn't manage to do that. There is lacking support here in France. For example, Marine Le Pen, the former National Front head, now the National Rally, was originally calling for France to leave the European Union, France to quit the euro. She stopped doing that now because she knows that in France there's not really any kind of support for that. Matteo Salvini in Italy was hoping to win power in 2 regions last week. He didn't manage to do that either, so his populist agenda is not working. So it's not quite as easy, maybe, I think, for populist parties to follow what Britain is doing for the moment. Depends how Brexit works out. If it's a shining success, Britain becomes much better off and people become a little bit envious of what has happened, then maybe that might encourage other European nations to try to also go for their own type of Brexit. But for the time being, it's a very long, drawn-out process, Alexander. We're just at the very start of the nitty-gritty hard work, and that's going to last for a long time.
A long time to come yet. Well, thank you very much, Philip Turle, our Foreign Affairs editor here at France 24. Now, while we saw Brexit celebrations in London, as Philip mentioned there was a very different reaction in Scotland, which voted mostly to remain in the EU. Alison Sargent tells us more.
She's sad, she's angry, and she's not wasting any time. As Britain pulls Scotland out of the EU, Nicola Sturgeon pleaded for Scottish voters to join her in seeking independence from the United Kingdom.
The UK that Scotland voted to remain part of in 2014, a UK inside the EU, will no longer be a reality. A new independence referendum will put the decision about the best path for Scotland into our own hands. And there is a cast iron mandate from both the public and from the Scottish Parliament for that referendum.
62% of Scottish voters rejected Brexit and have given Sturgeon's Scottish National Party a majority in the last 3 elections. But a political mandate is not the same as a legal right.
To have another referendum in Scotland, you would really need the Parliament in Westminster, so the UK Parliament, to approve that referendum. And the government at the moment has been absolutely clear. There will be no bill presented in Parliament, and there will be no vote on whether or not Scotland should have another referendum.
To keep up the pressure on Boris Johnson, Scottish Parliament voted their support for a second referendum earlier this week. If political pressure doesn't work, Nicola Sturgeon says she's not ruling out challenging the Prime Minister in court. In the meantime, Scottish MPs voted to keep the EU flag flying over their parliament as a demonstration of regret. And many Scots will be holding candlelight vigils as the clock strikes Brexit, a message to the EU to leave a light on for Scotland.
There have long been concerns that Brexit will result in job losses in the UK. Some of those for whom that is already a reality are the 73 British, now former MEPs, who are now leaving. Elsewhere, several European leaders have expressed sadness at Britain's departure, among them the French President Emmanuel Macron, who had this to say.
This is a sad day. We can't deny it. But it's also a day that should teach us to operate differently. We must be more determined in building an EU that is strong and effective. The EU is an adventure that is unique and, in my eyes, irreplaceable. Long live friendship between the UK and France. Long live Europe.
Vive l'Europe.
Those are the words of the French president. Now for more reactions from the heads in Brussels. I spoke earlier with the EU correspondent, Dave Keating.
There haven't been many big reactions. What's been interesting this whole week is that the EU is really trying to play this quiet. We had a press conference by the 3 presidents of the 3 EU institutions this morning, but after that, really nothing. Brussels has been pretty quiet, I think because the EU isn't really sure how to play this. Obviously, they don't want to celebrate it. They don't really want to mark it in any way either. Even when we saw the flags go down today, the British flags, it was done in a very quiet way without really a big ceremony or spectacle. Just one of the people that happened to be walking by happened to photograph it. But I imagine that on Monday we're going to get a little bit more response. Michel Barnier, the EU's Brexit negotiator, is supposed to brief the EU27 governments about next steps. And so really the EU now is focusing on the next months of negotiation that will be needed in order to agree that future free trade deal.
France 24's EU correspondent Dave Keating there giving the European reactions to Britain's departure from the bloc. We now move on to other world news, and the US President Donald Trump looks set for a quick acquittal after the US Senate ruled out calling witnesses at his impeachment trial. Opposition Democrats had hoped to swing 4 Republicans that would vote for witnesses, allowing the likes of the former White House advisor John Bolton to testify. The US President is facing a vote of 2 articles of impeachment, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, as Charlie James explains.
The yeas are 49, the nays are 51.
A big defeat for U.S. Democrats. Friday, the Senate's minority party was unable to convince the needed 4 Republicans to join them in voting for witnesses to be called in Donald Trump's impeachment trial.
It's a grand tragedy, one of the worst tragedies that the Senate has ever overcome. If the president is acquitted with no witnesses, no documents, the acquittal will have no value.
With the Senate controlled by the president's party, Democrats knew all along the trial would all but certainly end in acquittal. But House managers' hopes of beginning a new phase of the trial were dashed when 2 key Republican senators said they wouldn't join the push to subpoena witnesses. Eager for acquittal, the president and his allies resisted efforts by Democrats to keep the proceedings going. This included dismissing new revelations from John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, who says the president told him aid to Ukraine was tied to investigations into rivals. The timing of a final decision on Trump's fate is still uncertain, but Republicans have signaled it's a matter of days.
My guess is it probably is going to carry us over to the first part of next week, but obviously we have the Iowa caucuses on February the 3rd, and we have the State of the Union the next day. So I think for all sorts of reasons, it's probably a good idea to bring this thing to a close here in the near future.
That vote and Trump's likely acquittal will end just the third impeachment trial in American history.
China is racing to build 2 new hospitals in Wuhan to cope with the growing number of coronavirus patients. So far, the respiratory virus has infected almost 12,000 people, estimated, in China alone, and killed 259. This report from Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak, from our colleagues at France Television and Claire Rush.
It's an ambitious goal. Build 2 new hospitals in Wuhan in just 10 days. Following a lockdown on the city of 11 million, virtually emptying its streets, the hospitals are the latest in a series of official measures aiming to prevent the spread of a new coronavirus. Some 20 kilometers west of the city center lies the Huoshenshan Hospital construction site. Workers who broke ground a week ago are racing against the clock to build the facility, which will consist of prefabricated units. A glimpse of what rooms will look like in this hospital exclusively dedicated to coronavirus patients that will have 1,000 beds, according to authorities.
I've been here from the start. We work 12 hours a day.
There's more than 1,000 of us from various sectors.
Many of these workers are volunteers, mobilized in the epicenter of the outbreak, which the World Health Organization has declared a global public health emergency. Meanwhile, the second hospital is expected to be even larger, with up to 1,600 beds. Authorities hope it will be operational by Wednesday.
Stay tuned to France 24.